That's our chief correspondent, Peter Mansbridge, at the world's largest brain bank for CTE, a disease linked to repeated brain trauma. What he found out at the lab in Boston is stunning. And what you're about to see is an actual brain, as well as images of one brain in particular, former NHL star Rick Martin's, and how it's dramatically changing our understanding of brain trauma. Peter takes us inside the brain lab that could change hockey. Here is his exclusive report.
Stay up! Play the right side, Chase. Go on the right side. Get out, Chase.
This is a good day for Keith Primo, coaching one of his kids at a hockey tournament. Family time.
You're shooting off the wrong foot. Lean into it, okay? Direct it.
There's no dizziness, no headaches, no torment that can come with depression.
Yeah! Finish this up the right way.
You become very emotionally volatile. Those around you take the brunt of it. And so that's sad. So it's almost like a domino effect of emotions, and there's nothing you really can do or capable of stemming it other than to try and ride it out.
But 6 years on from his last concussion, the former NHL star still only counts good in days and weeks.
Dave.
Those periods of time over the last 2 or 3 years, and I enjoy them while they last, but have the ability to regress and show symptoms again.
Both skilled and physical on the ice, Primo never shied away from aggressive play, even as the concussion tally mounted.
I just don't know the number. I know it's north of 10.
Looking back now, he says it was one of his documented concussions, the second one, that should have been the wake-up call.
And for me, it actually is probably when I reflect as being the beginning of the demise.
May 2000, a devastating hit at center ice sent him to hospital. 48 hours later, he was back for another game.
I grew up with the mentality that you get out there at all costs. You play through injury, you play through pain, and I was no different.
Primo's story may sound familiar. After a run of concussions, he was done. One of a growing list of players forced to quit the game because of traumatic brain injury. What perhaps isn't so well known, Primo's also one of a small group of former pro athletes who are trying to turn those crushing hits into good by deciding right now where his battered brain will end up. Boston, home to the NHL's current Stanley Cup champions. Home also to a world-renowned repository of research on degenerative brain disease. Part of that research, a brain bank. A place where neuropathologist Dr. Anne McKee is learning from the head trauma suffered by fallen former athletes. And this has just arrived.
Right.
As we get rare access, a new delivery, the brain of a boxer who lived a long life, but with a brain that was slowly wasting away, and not because of age.
Oh, wow. So now, this is a huge space.
Yes.
And there's just tremendous loss of tissue here in this area called the hippocampus, where memories are stored. Tremendous loss of tissue. So I'm imagining he has quite substantial disease. His thalamus is also small, his subthalamic nucleus, very large frontal horns.
And when you say substantial disease, you're talking about CTE?
CTE,
yeah.
Right,
okay.
Right. This is really tremendous atrophy of the temporal lobe.
CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
Sure.
A relentless, progressive brain disease, which may lead to symptoms like mood changes, memory problems, loss of impulse control, even dementia.
This disease, CTE,
occurs after mild but repetitive brain trauma. And although it's triggered probably at the time of the trauma, the symptoms don't develop until usually 8 or 10 years later. And then once they emerge, they get steadily worse as long as the individuals survive.
McKee has seen it mostly in boxers, wrestlers, and football players. But if CTE sounds familiar to you, it may be because of this.
Hockey gets body checked by a deceased player. For the first time, a former NHLer is diagnosed with brain damage linked to concussions.
Alarm bells started ringing in the hockey world when McKee and her team found the disease for the first time in a former NHL player. Tough guy, Reggie Fleming, a big name back in the 1960s. Then last March, again, in the brain of NHL enforcer Bob Probert, who died when he was just 45.
Bob Probert was my roommate, and I remember chatting to him. I said, I'm going to donate my brain, and we both agreed that we were going to do that. And why wouldn't you?
Ryan Vandenbush never imagined that a few years later his friend would be dead and his brain might be used to help solve the concussion riddle.
There's no doubt about it. I mean, you take repeated blows to the head, there's going to be some sort of effects later on down the road. So I just don't know to what degree.
Vandenbush is aching to know. Like Probert, he was a brawler, most famously ending the career of Nick Kyprios in a knockout punch, never letting on his own often fragile state.
Did I hide some concussions throughout my career? Absolutely. I hid every one that I possibly could hide.
Hid them to keep his job in the NHL. Until he could hide no longer. Concussions and other injuries ended his career in 2006. His body battered. Today he's still almost constantly in pain. These days, if there's anything that will soothe, it's answers that he figures will eventually come through brain donation.
Chris Nowinski from BU is doing all these studies and analyzing brains, and I find it interesting that repeated blows to the head is going to bring an early onset of Alzheimer's and dementia. That kind of scares me. So I want to learn as much as I possibly can about that and be a part of that study if I possibly can and be on top of it, because we're not here that long, and I want to live a long, healthy life if I'm going to be here. So
I did not care about my brain until it was too late, okay?
Meet Chris Nowinski. Like Vandenbush, Primo, and so many others, he knows concussions intimately. He was an Ivy League football star.
And then, like every other Harvard graduate, I decided to join WWE.
Turned wrestling star. Eventually, concussions ended all that.
My symptoms got up there. I was in the club of the dark room, not sleeping, miserable. No one wanted to be around me.
But not his concern and curiosity.
Started kind of reading the background literature, falling back on my old consulting background, and I started reading what he was talking about. I'm like, well, this is black and white. There's no way we should be trying to push through these symptoms. I decided that once I figured that out and saw that although it would be hard, it would be easy to convince athletes to change their behaviors if they just knew. I decided to dedicate some time to that.
Armed with new knowledge, Nowinski wrote a book, realizing all the while a lot more needed to be done.
And that book kind of opened it up further with the idea that exposed me to some of this research, especially the studying brains post-mortem. I recognized very early was going to be the tipping point. That if you could provide the images of the brain damage and you could put a face to this disease, then you had a shot of changing minds.
So Nowinski started making phone calls, tough calls, to the families of athletes who had passed away. Last March, he quietly recruited the brain of 70s hockey legend Rick Martin. As part of the Buffalo Sabres' famed French Connection line, Martin was a huge star, remembered as a prolific goal scorer. Remembered also because of a frightening incident in 1978, a hook that sent his head, no helmet, crashing onto the ice. Martin was back the next season with a helmet. In fact, suddenly there were a lot more helmets in the NHL. Over the years, Martin adopted Buffalo as home. It was there, last March, that his heart failed while driving, and he passed away at 59 years of age.
We tracked down the phone number for Mrs. Martin, and we made a phone call. This was a case where they had heard of the research. It wasn't too long after Bob Probert he'd passed away, and we took the results that he had CTE public. Part of it, as Mrs. Martin said, Rick would have wanted people to learn from him. If other hockey players could be safer by studying his brain, that he would have been all for it.
Now, what has been the surprise that you found with Rick Martin?
He does have CTE. He has CTE, diagnostic changes of CTE. I think what's interesting or maybe extraordinary about his case is it's really fairly mild. Even though he's 59, he had a substantial athletic history, his disease is relatively mild. And that would suggest to me that Rick Martin was one of those individuals that just was resilient to the disorder, was less susceptible to the severity, or less likely to develop the severe disease that some of the other athletes have developed.
And the other thing, of course, about him is that he wasn't a fighter.
Right. No, I think that's very important.
Let's look at this is actually a cross section of a part of Richard Martin's brain.
Right. Okay.
What?
So these are two cross sections of his brain, like two half sections of brain through the middle part of the brain and a little bit more posterior. And the interesting thing is his abnormalities were really only found in a part of the brain called the temporal lobe.
It's those dark spots that indicate the abnormalities.
You can see that if you look microscopically, you can definitely find disease. There's no question about it. This is, there's no dispute. This is very definite change.
Would it surprise you that this could happen, as minor as it may be, that this could happen from one concussion?
That would surprise me, and I would say that it's unlikely it was just the one concussion, even though that's all we really know about. I'm going to imagine that there were many other more trivial blows to the head.
Subconcussions.
Right, that he may have sustained even as a youth that probably contributed. He didn't play with a helmet for most of his years, and so any blow to the head may have been a contributing factor.
Had he lived longer, it would have progressed, and who knows how quickly and who knows how badly, but he would have eventually developed dementia if he lived long enough, no question.
Eyes open, I want you to put your right foot in front of your left foot, heel to...
Nowinski's own doctor is Robert Cantu, neurosurgeon, educator, world-famous expert on concussions, sought out by pros everywhere, including hockey players. Cantu is alarmed by the Rick Martin findings.
What I can tell you bothers me. The first two cases in the National Hockey League, Reggie Fleming and Bob Probert, renowned fighters, 400 recognized fights during their ice hockey career, and it could be thought logically that their CTE is related to their fighting, and indeed it possibly is. But when we look at this more recent case of Mr. Martin, that's a problem because he wasn't a fighter. He'd only had perhaps one concussion. His brain trauma was quite minimal. And so we've got to be concerned that the jostling of the brain just from the skills of the sport of playing in the National Hockey League led to him having chronic traumatic encephalopathy when he died.
This is scary stuff. CTE linked not just to concussions, but to overall brain trauma. All those hits, the repetitive impact, the knocks, the shaking moments that are in all contact sports, but especially in hockey. So what do the Rick Martin findings mean? Perhaps that nobody is immune.
So to have somebody who was not thought to be showing symptoms, was not thought to be in a high-risk place, to have it, I hope gets people to realize that it could be any of us. You fall down, you hit your head, you could be sparking very destructive disease.
How does this impact you as not just a doctor, but as a person? Do you have kids?
Yeah. I think you know, it shocked me to tell you the truth, and I was really floored that the play of the game was associated with enough rattling of the brain to give rise to this disease in some individuals. And I think we've been, you know, very sort of blissfully ignorant of this. And you know, we've ratcheted up the game. We've gotten stronger, more physical players. It's a faster game. It's a you know, more violent game in many ways. And now it's sort of extraordinary to me that, you know, percolating along with this has been this brain disease. And I think the real thing that touches me is that we need to understand when this begins and what we're teaching our kids.
When we come back, solutions, what are they? And how seriously is the NHL searching for them?
We have a few folks on our panel today.
Just look at this launch for a new awareness campaign about concussions.
Concussion crosses all sports, and there's a real cry for information.
There's Keith Primo via Skype.
Primo calling for medical attention.
Because those post-concussion symptoms make it uncomfortable for him to fly. And like Primo, some are taking it a step further, deciding to pledge their brains to science. Almost everyone here at the head table.
Join us in a fight against an invisible injury.
A pro hockey coach, Kerry Goulet.
I'm just a guy who refuses to give up.
Saved by Rosen.
A gold medalist in sledge hockey, Paul Rosen, the first Paralympic athlete anywhere to offer.
The guy got hit with the right hand and don't remember anything until Tuesday.
That's Jim Thompson for Washington.
And another NHL enforcer, Jim Thompson. They understand the urgency to find answers, solutions. But what about the pro leagues? Do they get it?
I don't wring my hands and get depressed about it. But I spend a lot of time thinking about how we can take the head trauma out of every sport and still have the sport survive in a way that will be extremely entertaining to the public.
Obviously, entertainment is what the major professional leagues want too. That's how they make money. But brain injuries and the questionable deaths of some former players are now forcing change. Both the NFL and the NHL have been to see the Boston researchers looking for guidance. Both leagues have moved on the headshot issue with rule changes in the past year. But it seems there's more respect in Boston for the NFL's immediacy on the issue than for the NHL's.
Not to bury the guy, because I know he's trying, but you know, Brendan Shanahan, you know, we had a great conversation in the spring about this at an event. He even, you know, was kind enough to give me a ride from New Jersey into Manhattan. We talked about the work, and I said, you have to come up and see the brains for yourself. We exchanged 30 emails trying to schedule a day this summer when he was on the Cape, and he never came. And if I, you know, and I don't want this to poison our relationship in the future, but if I'm him, he's got to see these things for himself.
The ball.
5 years removed from the NHL and the nightly brawling, Ryan Vandenbush lives peacefully now, seeking peace of mind, too.
I've got young kids. I got a lot of life to live. I'm only 38 years old, so I want to be on top of things.
But he's one of those guys. Nowinski calls them ticking clocks. Vandenbush seems haunted by that.
Too bad he couldn't study a person's brain that's actual living. You know, that's been through, you can have a conversation with a guy, they can study your brain, you can be honest with a person that's studying your brain and get some real results, but it's too bad. Well, maybe that'll come.
Maybe sooner than he thinks.
As this grows, there's more than just donating your brain. You know, we're going to get people in the lab and imaging and try to find a way to diagnose this in living people and eventually treat it.
We can work on improving the quality of life, but unfortunately we don't have a magic bullet yet to stop the relentless progressive neurodegeneration that's going on in their brain.
Dr. Ann McKee says that's the goal. An explosion of information in recent years is helping to get them there. What do we know now about CTE that we didn't know 10 years ago?
I'd say about 98% of what we know. I mean, it's just been extraordinary what we've learned in the last 3.5 years. First of all, we now have gathered in this brain bank, we've already doubled the history of the world's experience in this disease. We have more cases now in this brain bank than have ever been described throughout history. And we are trying to come up with ways to image this disease with MRIs and CT scans, diffusion tensor imaging. We're trying to come up with blood tests and maybe even CSF tests, the spinal fluid tests. We're very hopeful that in the near future we will be able to diagnose this disease during life.
But I know from the studies they've had and the results they've shown that I've damaged my brain. I've had a lifetime of injury to my head, and that there's a real chance that when I'm gone, I will show signs of CTE.
The former star is realistic, but he worries.
My biggest fear is when I do begin to show signs or symptoms that it's rapid. I don't want that. I fear how drastic it will be.
Go, 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 go.
Keith Primo knows he can't turn back the clock to his NHL days, change his own bad behavior, but he can help others recognize concussions, and as a coach and father, counsel 100% recovery before returning to play.
So many athletes with that same mentality, and what we need to understand is that there's a real consequence for that type of behavior. And although it appears to be not courageous, real courage is having the ability to stand up and say, I'm not well, I don't feel right, and I need to take the time to heal.